and welcome to Book Lust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today, via Zoom at Folio in downtown Seattle, is writer and musician Rosalyn Story. Roz, I'm really excited to talk to you today about your new novel, Sing Her Name, as well as many other things. But let's begin with where we met. And we met in Tulsa, Oklahoma, many, seems like years ago. And what were you doing? You weren't a writer then.
At the time, yes, I was not a writer then. I just started to dabble with writing a little bit, but I wasn't really doing it much. I was a violinist with the Tulsa Philharmonic Orchestra. That was my job. And it was right around that time when I began to start thinking about the possibility of writing.
And I was working in a bookstore in a very posh shopping center, outdoor shopping center, I guess we would call it, called Yorktown Alley Bookstore. And you came in with some other musicians from the symphony, and we became friends. And then you moved in 1987, I think you said, to Dallas to go to play in the Fort Worth Symphony, play violin in the Fort Worth Symphony. So when did you start? Talk about your history as a writer and why you added that to your to your life, as well as all those hours of practice.
Well, I started writing when I was in Tulsa, and I had a full-time job, but at that time, the orchestra was a full-time job, but that symphony was only about 36 weeks a year, and we had night rehearsal. I had a lot of time to do other things. And I began thinking about writing, and I just wanted to do something. I'd always been a reader, a great reader, and I'd always loved to sort of write my own little personal essays and journal and all that kind of thing. And so I just decided to go and knock on the door of this Black weekly in Tulsa called the Oklahoma Eagle newspaper. And I just said, here, I just write for fun. Here's some essays. Can I write for you guys? I have all this time. I love to write. I love your paper. And they said, well, we will, why don't we try you out for a few days? And if we like you, then we will hire you after a week. So I wrote for free for them for, I think it was 4 days, and they hired me on the 5th day. And I became a writer for the Oklahoma Eagle during the day and a violinist at night. And that was the beginning of it all.
Were you writing book reviews for the Oklahoma Eagle, or what were you?
No, the funny thing about the Oklahoma Eagle with the staff of 8 people, we had to do layout. We almost had to deliver the papers physically ourselves. We did everything. So I was covering City Hall, education, arts. And one of my first articles for National Magazine, Essence Magazine, came out of my working with the Oklahoma Eagle, because a young opera singer, Leona Mitchell, was coming back to do Aida. And they said, well, Rosalyn, you're in the orchestra. Grab her during rehearsal and see if you can do an interview with her. So she had been singing at the Met with Placido Domingo, having been from Oklahoma originally. So that was a great story. And that led to actually my first book, which was called And So I Sing, African American Divas of Opera and Concert, where I wrote about young singers like Leona Mitchell and their journey, their story, and so forth.
And where did you do the research for that? I mean, because that must have been difficult. I mean, that was pre-Wikipedia, et cetera.
Nancy, that was pre-internet, pre-everything. Forget about Wikipedia. There was nothing. I went to the card catalog of the downtown library. You know, the card catalog, you thumb through the cards, the 3x5 cards, and they're called the Reader's Guide to Periodicals, Literature, those volumes. That's where I got my information. I can't believe that I did all that legwork then. Didn't know if I would do that again, actually, but now the internet has changed everything, for research especially.
So when you wrote that, were you familiar with all those women, or was a lot of it, trying to find who these sort of unsung, if you'll forgive the pun, unsung women were?
Well, I had interviewed a man named John Hope Franklin. I don't know if you know about his books. He's the foremost historian. He's now deceased, but he wrote a kind of a major textbook called From Slavery to Freedom, was on Barack Obama's, I think it was his initiative, his task force for education and history and so forth. Anyway, I interviewed him while I was in Tulsa, and he said, "Oh, he loved opera," and he said, I said, "Well, I'm thinking about writing a book about opera singers, Black opera singers," and he said, "Well, you must write about Sissieretta Jones, the 19th century diva." And I said, "Oh, of course, I'll write about her." I had no idea who she was. Well, then I went to the card catalog and I found a little card that had a dissertation, of Syracuse University dissertation written by a woman who was someone distantly related to her. And then I learned about her. She was kind of a footnote in history. But she was an opera singer who basically was world famous, sang before U.S. presidents, sang all over the country and the world, and became an incredibly well-known African American performer, but never was allowed to sing in opera companies because they were not integrated. So that brings me to, I don't want to jump ahead, but that's the inspiration for this new book, Her Name.
Yeah. So let's fill in the gaps between that first book and your newest novel, Sing Her Name, which is based on the life of that woman, which I thought was very interesting. But talk about the books that came in between.
Okay, so my first, After and So I Sing, African American Divas of Opera and Concert, which came out in 1990, I think it was. That was the story of the African American diva from post-slavery up through, I think it was Kathleen Battle, Jessie Norman, that kind of heyday of American opera, which was a huge time for American opera. Then I wrote my first novel. I'd always wanted to write, a novel, and I naively thought that a novel would be easier to write because you didn't have to do all that research. You could just go in your room, make up a story, and well, of course, I was very, very wrong. It took a lot longer to write the novel and get it published and all that. But I had fun writing that. So More Than You Know, what took me back to my Kansas City roots and my love of jazz, and Kansas City is a jazz town. And I had this parallel story of a married couple with both of them musicians, and they get separated and through family secrets and so forth. I had a lot of fun with that, writing about the mystery of why their marriage didn't work and what secrets they were hiding from each other and so forth. And so that came out, I think, in 2004 or 5. And then the next book after that was Waiting Home, and that was a novel of New Orleans, which was inspired by my love for New Orleans and my feelings about Hurricane Katrina. And that's the story of a family reconnecting after Hurricane Katrina, and a young man's reluctance to accept his family's history. But in the separation from his father during the aftermath of that storm, he reconnects with his own past and reconciles a lot of things in his own history. So that came out, I think, in 2010. And then Then we made an opera. A friend of mine, a composer, Mary Alice Rich, she and I teamed together to write an opera based on Waiting Home that we took to New Orleans. We performed in Dallas. We got a grant from the Sphinx organization for $40,000 to produce it. And then we ended up performing in South Africa, and we did it 3 cities in South Africa in, I think it was 2018.
Wow. But so your newest book seems to have brought together all the interests that you talked about. It's about this unknown woman singer. It's set in New Orleans, partially in New Orleans, so it kind of combines everything about that. So what was the inspiration to do this book as a novel?
Yes. Well, the inspiration to do it as a novel, to fictionalize the life of, you're talking about the fictionalization of Sissieretta Jones' life, as opposed to telling the story of her life. Well, there is a biography of her life already written by a woman named Maureen Lee. If you want to get that story, it's very well done. But I've always felt that you can tell history, you can teach history best through fiction. I think great storytelling is a great way of getting across the truth.
Right.
So I wanted people to know about Sissieretta Jones. So I fictionalized her story and gave her another name, Celia DeMille. I played with events and various things in her life. Things that happened were in the book, and things that did not happen were in the book. And the location. She was not from New Orleans. She was from Virginia. But I also wanted to parallel that with a young singer's plight. There are many young singers who have incredible voices, but don't have the means or the support or whatever to get them to the next level. So I wanted to pair the life of someone like Sissieretta Jones in the 19th century with the life of a young struggling singer who might want to do that kind of thing, but has no idea of the depth and breadth of her own talent or the means to advance it in some kind of way. So I created Celia DeMille as a fictionalized version of Sissieretta Jones, and then Eden Malveaux is a fictionalized version of the young women that I interviewed for my first book, And So I Sing. And I also get a chance to put a little bit of New Orleans food in there and some jazz and all the, like you said, all the things that I like. My love for popular music, for show tunes, because Eden, she's a singing waitress. She has a great voice, but she sings to her customers, and they want to hear show tunes and R&B and hip hop and so forth. So yeah, there are all of those things that I put together.
And Eden has no knowledge of Sissieretta Jones. I mean, she doesn't realize that there's a line of of African American black opera singers or black singers at all, and so which is such a loss for her because she feels like she's alone without a way to move forward.
Right. Eden is someone with a high school education. She is raising her brother as if he were her own child. She has a lot on her. She's 34 years old. Their parents are deceased. She has fled New Orleans from after the storm to New York City for a number of reasons to get away from, the floods of, the situation in New Orleans, but also to give her brother an opportunity. Well, actually, your brother is fleeing from trouble that he had here. She gets into New York, and she has kind of an opening up of people that she meets, and they sort of propel her in this direction. But she has no knowledge of. No, I mean, I had no knowledge of Sissieretta Jones, and I'm a musician. So
Right.
someone
Right.
like Eden, no, she would not know of any, not even the contemporary opera singers. In fact, he didn't know anything about opera just in general. Like I think a lot of people don't.
Right. Right. One of the things that you're doing now, or you're going to be doing, is teaching a course at SMU, at Southern Methodist, on Black women singers. And what was the impetus? I mean, when I learned that you were doing that, or that you were planning to do that you had offered to do a course, and they said yes, they would like that, which is great, I think. I thought, oh, that's the kind of course that would have done Eden so much good had she been able to take that course.
Exactly. Well, the impetus for that was in the spring of 2020 when everybody was locked down. We were looking at our TVs because this whole resurgence of Black Lives Matter on the aftermath of the George Floyd murder was happening. So, first of all, I had a lot of time to think about what to do. The symphony was not playing. We were basically locked down. We were not playing because of the health hazard. There were no vaccines at the time. So, so I was watching this whole drama of the whole Black Lives Matter people, Black and white people, in the streets with banners and so forth, protesting the injustice. And it occurred to me, and I've always thought that one of the problems with race in this country is that we don't know each other's stories. And if we knew each other's stories, it may not make a difference to everybody, but for those who said, people could no longer say, well, I didn't know about that kind of thing existing. Once you know it, then you have to admit that you know it. And what are you going to do about it? Maybe nothing, but at least now you know. So I thought, I've always wanted to teach a course having to do with history and African American history as part of American history, because I think African American history is also American history. And if you don't know African American history, then a part of your knowledge of American history is missing, and you are diminished by that lack of knowledge. So I thought, well, here's an opportunity to jump on this bandwagon, because a lot of arts institutions were trying to think about what we can do to advance this conversation. There were a lot of feelings of, oh my God, how could this have been happening all these years and me not be aware of it? What can we do as an institution and so forth? So, I mean, the New York Times was writing, articles about Black musicians and composers and conductors and artists and poets, and all this stuff was coming out, and I thought, here's a chance to do something in my area. And so, by the way, the course is not just about Black opera singers; it's about the evolution of Black music as it affects American music in general. So I start with post-slavery, spirituals. The original American art song is a spiritual, and you go from that to ragtime, to jazz and blues and so forth. And then you get people like George Gershwin, who taps into that, and he gets inspired, and he's revered as a major composer. And then you get Leonard Bernstein. And then these people were all influenced by what happened with Black music. And I wanted to show that evolution and how we have been able to have an impact on American music, but also line those musical advancements up with various political and social events, such as when Marian Anderson debuted at the Metropolitan Opera in '55 as the first African American to do so, the same year as the Montgomery bus boycott, when Rosa Parks refused to give her seat up and launched a year-long protest against the bus system in Montgomery, Alabama. Those things were lining up very neatly. As I saw musical advancement for Black people, I would see something else happen as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think that one of the saddest things, or unfortunate things, I guess, is that there's no recordings of Sissieretta Jones's voice? Do you lie awake at night and think, oh gosh, there must be something out there?
I will tell you that the late great Jessie Norman, before she died, was working on a project called Call Her by Her Name with some other artists, including Harolyn Blackwell, former Metropolitan Opera soprano, and some other people, trying to raise awareness about Sissieretta Jones's life. They ended up doing a little short PBS documentary about maybe 10 minutes or so long. But Jessie Norman at Plant, one of the last quotes that I read from her was that we hope there's a recording out there somewhere. Maybe somebody will find something. So I don't know that there is not a recording. I know that one has yet to be found. Mm-hmm. So you never know.
And do you have your next writing project in mind, or are you just waiting with an open mind to think of till something occurs to you?
Something happens. Well, this is it's an interesting question, because at this time, normally I would have another project in mind. But I have been thinking lately about when I wrote Waiting Home, and certainly this book too, I'm thinking about how fiction can make an impact, and what you can teach through fiction. So I decided after Waiting Home that my next books would be about something that could leave an impression on someone, something historic, some kind of connection, social conscious, social awareness, because you have people who are reading your stuff who maybe don't know about these things that you care about so deeply. So I'm thinking about how I can, and there's several ideas that I have that maybe none of them will come to pass, but I am thinking about what I can do in terms of, I don't know what my next book will be, but I hope that it will have, first of all, I still love music, and I kind of hang my hat on that idea of using music as a device to sort of make me feel comfortable in that fictional world. But I'm thinking also about all the stories that have yet to be told of Black history and Black people, the things like Sissieretta Jones. I mean, there are countless stories of African Americans and other people who have not been brought to light in this time. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking about that's I know that's a vague and very roundabout way of answering your question. The short answer is I don't know, but I am thinking about it.
Do you ever think about updating your first book? Because that seems like that's been 20, 30, well, 1990. It's been, yeah.
There is a plan. I can't necessarily talk about it now because we haven't signed it. But yes, there is a plan to update it this year, I believe, with an African American publishing company, and we'll see. Yes, it does need updating. I tried at one point to update it at least 10 years ago, and could not get any takers. But I think the time is maybe.
Yeah, right, right. Um, I notice when we corresponded to set up this interview, I know that you said you're reading The Great Circle, or you just recently read The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, which is a novel that I enjoyed a lot. It's just a terrific novel that came out late last year. But that's a book that's told in that like Sing Her Name, is told in two time periods. And so I thought, wow, you're really enjoying Sing Her Name, and I mean, you're really enjoying The Great Circle, and then you have this book. And your books are generally in halves, right? Two parts.
Actually, they have been. And now I think about it, I didn't realize that until you just said it, but all of the fictional books have been two lives. And,
right.
There was then Waiting Home, the son, Julian, and father Simon, and then More Than You Know, there was LJ and his wife Olivia. Yeah, I did not realize. Thank you, Nancy, for pointing that out. But yes, now I've forgotten your question. You were talking about the parallel lives. Yeah, Great Circle. What she does has, the actress, a 21st century actress, who has been hired to play the role of this woman, this early 20th century aviatrix in World War II, and going back and forth between that. Yes, I actually was inspired by another book, Possession, by A.S.
Byatt.
Byatt. I never know how to pronounce it or Byatt. But yes, that book kind of influenced me too in terms of having those juxtaposing those time periods and those lives, and showing how they connect and how they're different.
Was there one part of Sing Her Name that was easier for you to write than the other part, since you're going back and forth between Celia and?
Yes, I think that I was probably more drawn to the 21st century character, the young, because I related to her so strongly. My heart went out to her because she was struggling and she was not terribly well educated, and she was kind of floundering, and then she had this baggage of the past, that was kind of haunting her. And she had a brother she had to take care of, was always in trouble. That's the idea I think that maybe came first, and then the idea of maybe putting in this 19th century diva as an inspiration. And then of course Sissieretta Jones, that was a huge inspiration. By the way, this year marks the 130th anniversary of her performance at Carnegie Hall, which is another thing that is interesting to me, that she was the first African-American performer of color, a performer of color to sing opera at Carnegie Hall in 1892. And there are just stories like that kind of influenced me. But yes, the whole idea of the two lives is really interesting because I love history. And I love seeing how history can influence the present and what we can all learn from it.
Mm-hmm. What are you reading now? I'm assuming you finished The Great Circle, which you listened to, right? You did it as an audio book.
Well, the book that I just ordered, I haven't started reading much of it, but it's called Dvorak's Prophecy. The composer Antonin Dvorak prophesied in 1892 that the music of America would be heavily influenced by the spirituals. And he actually told American composers, white composers, if you want to know about the future, he was teaching in America and New York. They hired him to teach there. And he was telling reporters at the time, you've got all this wealth of music right around you. You've got this African-American tradition of spirituals and jazz and blues. You need to go and look at that as your blueprint for the future of music. That kind of didn't happen. It was more like Aaron Copland became the kind of the blueprint for American music. albeit, the fact that Bernstein and Gershwin did take up the mantle and did allow it to influence him. But this book, Dvorak's Prophecy, written by Joseph Horowitz, it tells that story of how America kind of dropped the ball in the 1890s and did not fully take advantage of this wealth of music. And the reason they didn't is because of the way they felt about these recently freed slaves. 30 years after slavery, this European guy is telling us to look at these slaves that we're just tolerating as the model for our future. Well, Dvorak had built his own reputation for a composer around his folk singing, his folk songs of the past. So they were the songs of his homeland. So he said, look to what your country has created, and that should be your model. Don't look to Europe to guide you, because Americans were trying to imitate Europe. He said, no, you've got your own music here. Look and be inspired by that. So that's Dvorak's Prophecy by Joseph Horowitz.
Well, Roz, it's been just a delight talking to you, and good luck. I'm looking forward now to your new book, whatever it may be. And I think you're so right that there are these untold stories and really people that musicians, singers, who we have no idea about, and to have them brought to life in fiction or biography, I think is just a wonderful thing that you're doing. So thank you on all levels.
And thank you so much, Nancy. It's wonderful to see you again after all these years. And I appreciate so much your having me on your show. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.